news, of course, is that the other sessions are all going to be so stimulating that you'll forget there ever existed a thing called tea. We're also, at the end of this session, we're going to do some voting. I think you've just been issued with your voting gizmos again, so keep them by you, because we're definitely going to have a quick voting session straight after this session. This session is focused on landfill-free cities, a circular economy approach. And of course, there's a huge amount of buzz going on now about the circular economy, about its economic potential as well as its environmental plus sides. And there's also, matching it, a great deal of concern about landfill, about waste out in the environment, in particular about plastic, which has recently made the headlines in the West, but also, I believe, in India as well. So we've got a really interesting panel to discuss this. I'll invite them up on stage. We'll start off with Dr. Suneel Pandey from TERI. He's Senior Fellow and Director of TERI's Environment and Waste Management Division, so he knows of what he speaks. And then our panelists. Next, you'll come up, please, Mr. Mahesh Babu, who's Managing Director of IL&FS Environment Infrastructure and Services Limited, followed by Dr. Christian John Engelsen. Dr. Engelsen is Senior Research Scientist at the Department of Architectural Engineering of SINTEF. We have Mr. Ashish Mathur, who's Managing Director of JUSCO, Mr. Nitin Prasad, who's Chairman of Shell Companies in India, and last and definitely not least, Venkatesh Valluri, Chairman and Managing Director, Valluri Technology Accelerators and the Valluri Change Foundation. So with that, I shall hand over to Dr. Pandey for what I'm sure will be an interesting session.
Thank you, Martin. Do we need hand mics, or this will do?
Hello.
I think this will do. Very good evening to all of you. And from the energy, now we move to solid waste. And solid waste, just to set the context, very quickly, I'd like to tell you that a country like India generates around 62 million tons of municipal solid waste every year. And it's a huge task for cities to manage the waste in a proper manner. We know that there are problems in effective segregation, there are problems in managing organic waste at the source. And there are, that is why a lot of mixed waste is reaching the landfill sites. And the landfill sites also have their own problem in terms of now they're reaching their capacities, and in most of the large cities, be it Bombay, be it Delhi, be it Chennai, be it Hyderabad, and Ahmedabad, and so on. And the landfills are now a source of problem, source of pollution. There are fire incidences in landfill because of uncontrolled emission of methane. There are incidences of garbage burning at the landfills, contributing to not only methane, but also to black carbon. And in Delhi, we have been talking on how also to address pollution from garbage burning while addressing air pollution in the city. And we are also, when you look at recycling, we are trying to look at not only traditional recycling, which we have been doing so far. We are trying to look at new concepts, like looking at redesign, remanufacturing, upcycling, value-added products from waste before they are sent for treatment processing, and product design leading to longer shelf life, longer use life, so that they enter into waste streams at a later stage, using less and less hazardous material in the product which we manufacture, so that there's less complicated treatment processes which are adopted. And these are clearly elements of circular economy if we look at how 3 are basically linked to circular economy. And also, they are also closely linked to SDGs, especially SDG 12, looking at sustainable consumption and production. So with this quick introduction and background to the session, I'll close my remarks here. And as per sheet provided to me, I'll start requesting my panelists, very distinguished panelists, to present their views. And after that, we'll open the session to question answers. We'll start with Mr. Mahesh Babu to my left. And we have 4 minutes for each of the panelists, so I hope we could put our views in that 4 minutes. Mr. Mahesh Babu.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, and distinguished fellow panelists and friends. Since I have just 4 minutes, I'll try and keep it very brief. We manage about 14,000 tons of waste every day across the country. It's a huge challenge. As Dr. Pandey mentioned, municipalities spend about 80% of all their solid waste budgets only on collection and transportation. It follows the familiar syndrome of not in my backyard, what we call in our business the NIMBY syndrome. So it puts a huge pressure in terms of trying to see how you can handle the waste that reaches the unscientific dump sites. For instance, just within 15 kilometers of this very venue, there are 3 overflowing dump sites in Okla, Balaswa, and in Ghazipur. You may have heard of the tragedy that occurred in Ghazipur. And it's a huge problem from the point of view of pollution as well, because close to 20% of Delhi's pollution has been attributed to improper, unscientific solid waste management. So what is it that we as a company try to do in terms of addressing this issue? One of the things that we have developed over time is an integrated solution. If you break up the waste into a couple of streams, one is one aspect of waste which is not being given sufficient attention, in my opinion, is construction and demolition waste, where we have set up India's first pioneering C&D waste management plant in Burari. We process close to 2,000 tons. We have processed about 3 million tons in that facility. 3 million tons which would have otherwise ended up in the Yamuna, for instance, or in the Ridge, in the case of the pollutants. The other waste stream that we have is the biodegradable waste. Here again, I think there's a unique opportunity for the country to see if we can have partnerships with fertilizer companies and with other farming institutions. India's soil is very, very bereft of organic carbon. 67% of our soil lacks organic carbon. So there's an opportunity there as well. The other stream is the combustibles. We convert waste into energy. We have put up India's first Euronorm compliant plant in Ghazipur, and we are achieving Euronorm emissions, and it's possible with all our constraints to do that as well. The other echo in this whole theme is really partnerships. It's partnership with households to ensure that you segregate waste. It's partnership with fertilizer companies, as I mentioned, where you can use it as organic fertilizer. It's partnership with construction companies who need to use recycled products. It's partnership with discoms and managers of, let's say, plastics, for instance, where you can use it to generate energy as well. And I think unless these partnerships are really put in place and every single aspect of this works, Swachh Bharat is pretty much going to remain a slogan. So I think it's imperative that as we go forward as a country, if we are to tackle, as Dr. Pandey mentioned, 62 million tons of waste every year, it's imperative that we put these partnerships in place, partnerships with rag pickers, partnerships with other stakeholders as well. And then I think you will have a chance of licking this problem. Otherwise, the municipalities itself find it very difficult to manage the waste on the processing end, because as I mentioned, they're both financially as well as organizationally constrained to a certain extent. Yeah. So that's my fundamental pitch is I think we all need to work together as stakeholders to try and overcome this problem. And it's a very doable, it is doable in terms of ensuring that we can come up with a solution that works for us. There's a huge linkage to health as well, because both are firmly intertwined here. So those are my initial thoughts. I think I'll move on, right?
Thank you, Mr. Babu, to finish your thoughts in stipulated time. We now, from India, move to Norway, and Dr. Christian has a presentation, and he would probably finish it in 5 minutes. So we'll see what we can learn from Norway and in general you in diverting the waste from landfills and trying to reduce the need for the landfills.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah. I will just give you a flavor of what we are doing in collaboration activities in India regarding handling and recovery of urban waste streams in relation to circular economy and in the construction and building industry. The circular economy approach is the main objective with the circular economy approach is to keep the resources within a never-ending circle, and that means the raw materials, but also the energy conservation. If you look at the two major waste streams, not only in India but elsewhere, the construction and demolition waste and municipal solid waste, we look to India. Yes, there are variation in these estimates, but the point is that there are enormous volumes of C&D waste and municipal solid waste, which represent challenges, but also represents an enormous raw material source and an energy source. The construction and demolition waste is literally everything that comes out from construction, demolition, reconstruction, and rehabilitation, and 30 to 50% of this is concrete and masonry, which can be treated and recycled into recycled aggregates. And these recycled aggregates can be used in a numerous of application scenarios, like ready-mix concrete, concrete products, etc., etc. And we have even started a feasibility study of using this, the fines from C&D waste into cement clinker production. Okay, this is only a modern C&D waste facility where you can produce high-quality aggregates, and we have demonstrated this in various building and civil engineering applications. If we look to the other major urban waste stream, like the municipal solid and commercial waste, we heard that Mr. Palikar yesterday from Geocycle talked about the unrecyclable fraction, the rejects that can be converted into refuse-derived fuel, or RDF. And this can be replacing the coal in cement clinker production, which is, in other words, called co-processing. It partly substitutes the coal fuel with alternative fuel, and it substitutes the raw material with alternative raw materials. In Norway, we have a thermal substitution rate of approximately 7%, 70%. That means that 70% of the coal that goes for cement production is replaced. In Europe, it's on average 40, and in India, it is less than 3%. In 2015, we started the Indo-Norwegian cooperation with CPCB, which had the primary goal to increase the treatment capacity for hazardous and industrial waste. This has been turned into a phase 2 together with a number of Indian stakeholders like GIZ, CPCB, the cement industry, etc., etc. Okay, so in 2016, when we relate this to construction and demolition waste, we signed up a MOU with the Central Public Works Department in the Parliament House in the presence of Honorable former Urban Minister Venkaya Naidu and the ambassador from Norway to India. And this MOU is turned into a concrete project which is called treatment and recycling of C&D waste in India, which started last year, where the overall objective is to increase this capacity of C&D waste. It has not only the CPWD as a partner. We have tied up a collaboration with Resilient Energy in Mumbai, and also an excellent collaboration with the IL&FS Academy of Applied Development, and also IL&FS Environment through the 3 different recycling facilities in Delhi, Munka, Shastri Park, and Burari. We had, this is from the workshop last year with during the inauguration with Director General at CPWD and the Norwegian Embassy. And 2 weeks back, we had a very successful workshop which focused on business development and market development when it comes to C&D waste recycling and use. And this was organized by IL&FS, Resilient Energy, and SINTEF. So this collaboration seems to be a very strong collaboration. Okay, since my time is very limited, I cannot go into this. This is my last slide. This is the CO2 binding potential, and which few are actually aware of, that when you are recycling C&D waste, you are actually saving a lot of CO2 emission. And we have done a calculation here which says that the potential is around 20 to 40 million tons per year if all the cement-based part of the C&D waste is crushed. So this is figures that are significant, and I will end my presentation with these figures. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Venkatesh. To add to this information, we are now engaged by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in mapping the cement clusters and also the towns around the cement clusters in 100, 200, 300 kilometer radius to basically look at potential of RDF being fed to these cement industries to achieve whatever thermal substitution rate they can achieve in future. So with this excellent presentation, we now move to Mr. Ashish Mathur. Ashish Mathur is from JUSCO, perhaps the only private ULB in the country, and it has been doing fantastic job over the years. So I would request Mr. Mathur to share his experiences. Mr. Mathur.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pandey. I think we heard Mahesh, Babu, and we've just heard from the Norway. The issue, I believe, as far as the landfill is concerned, has been known for ages. And we all know the kind of the technology development which is taking place in trying to find out solutions for various, the combination of the solid waste across the country. I have a different perspective on this issue. Typically, all the technologies which are getting developed are all for that purpose, what we just heard from Mr. Babu as well. You have the 6 cosmo cities in the country, which is, of course, Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, Chennai, Bangalore, and Pune, where the waste generated is significantly large quantities. And then, of course, you have other 7 B-class cities where you're still dealing with the issue. Actually, when we talk about the landfill and the kind of treatment which you will need, are the places, 83% of the India's urban developments, urban habitats, where you have the generation in the range of about 250 metric tons to about 500 metric tons. Now, that is not the critical mass for most of these solutions that we talk about. And therefore, it is so critical for us to find the solutions which eventually will help us reduce the quantum which goes for landfill. In Jamshedpur, for example, where the population is 1.4 million people out there, and we have approximate generation of about 300 metric tons per day, we started experimenting a lot, of course, in compliance with the Solid Waste Management Rule 2016, as to how do we inculcate the habit of elimination at source. Now, we just talked about, for example, solid waste management, the rules basically prescribe door-to-door collection, and we all know the complexities associated with door-to-door collection. So we created the whole new model of social entrepreneurship there, whereby we kind of took up these rack pickers, the problem which you just, so the rack pickers from the street, we helped them, we trained them, and we converted them into social entrepreneurs, and thereby we created an entirely new stream of business across the city. And today we have almost 28,000 houses where the door-to-door collection is very effective. And not only is it effective in the sense that somebody comes to and collect the waste from a door, but it is also incumbent upon the generator also to segregate that and give it to the, otherwise it will not be picked up. So many such aspects. Then other part, for example, we talked about construction and demolition waste. We have not reached that level yet, but we have found a very significant recycled use for the plastics, which we use regularly in the road construction in the city. So almost 30% of bitumen is replaced by the plastic or the segregated plastic that we use that we collect and shred it and use in the bitumen. So the point which I would like to draw out here is that while we talk about the technical solutions or the technologies, evolving technologies for the tier 2 cities or tier 3 cities, where we are there and not there, where the landfill is always a complex issue, where the sentiments of the people are even more complex than probably the metro cities, so to say, where the technical solutions are possible but not possible. Under the circumstances, I believe that elimination at source is something which has to be consistently pushed forward, and thereby trying to bring about a paradigm shift in the way people think, people behave, and eventually, I think we will try and get ourselves to a situation where the mass which goes to the landfill is minimized almost to 17% of totally what is generated. Because another important aspect of this whole equation is that the cost of treatment of the waste cannot actually be more than the cost of the product which is generating that waste. So this economics has to work out, especially for Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. So I'll rest my point at this point of I'm here, and I think we'll go ahead with the discussions later on.
Thank you, Mr. Mathur. And Mr. Mathur also informs us that JUSCO also ensures that the township is zero liquid discharge township, and all the sewage which is generated is treated and reused. Nothing goes for discharge.
That's yeah. So the Jamshedpur and Jamshedpur is a city. As I said, the population is 1.4 million people, which is about 83% of the Indian habitats as far as the urban development is concerned. We almost generate 40 million liters per day, the sewage. The last drop of that sewage is actually treated and is brought back into the city, thereby making Jamshedpur the first city in the country which can be termed as zero liquid discharge city.
We now move to Mr. Nitin Prasad, the head Shell. And Shell, incidentally, has developed a very interesting technology for waste management, and we look forward to hearing more from Mr. Nitin Prasad himself. Mr. Prasad.
I think I'll just take off from where Mr. Mathur sort of left on. I think it's quite clear that while we sort of all understand the social costs of landfills and in terms of what it means, whether it's rag pickers or whether it's waste or air quality, I think the reality is that we need economic models that work for us. And there must be sufficient returns, otherwise we're not going to be able to actually make a systemic change. And especially in a country where India, where we need to spend a lot more money just on basic infrastructure at this point in time. And this is an area, so we firmly believe that we need to focus on innovation in terms of how to actually handle this challenge. And innovation, I think, can come in two different spaces. It can come in both in the technologies that we use, and we heard two very good examples before, and also in terms of the business models that come at the back end of that, which of course was the case that was mentioned by Mr. Mathur there. So we at Shell has taken up the former area of how do we start to do innovation in technologies. And here too, we've broken this aspect down into two different areas. What do we do with the landfills that exist today, which are actually quite dangerous? There's certainly trapped methane. They're explosive in their very nature and have certain challenges. And then what do we do with the generation that's done on a daily basis by the population, which is ever increasing at about 5% rate year on year? For the former side, with the landfills today, we've developed technology to focus on methane extraction and anaerobic digesters. So how do you actually try and take the products that are actually being created quite naturally in the landfill itself and then extract them outwards and potentially connect them to gas pipelines and take a viable product out of the landfill itself. In the latter portion, about the daily generation of waste that is happening, we've developed a technology that we call it I8 squared. It is able to take a mixed feedstock of waste, which I think is quite unique in this space, and able to economically process this to BS6 or Euro 6 equivalent fuels with a greenhouse gas emission reduction of about 70 to 90%. Now this is a technology, we have a demo plant, and we've created this plant, and we're happy to sort of take this forward. And what we're looking for is now the right partnerships to actually be able to take some of this, because frankly, without that, we're not going to be able to take this whole platform forward. So let me just sort of close on that piece. I think I would suggest to you that we are now getting to the point in time where the innovation has started to come in at the technological side, at the product side, where across our different companies, we have all done experiments, we've all created pilot solutions that can be commercially potentially scaled. There is innovation and thinking and experiments that has been done on the source, the segregation, the sorting, as well as the behavioral side of the house. And what is now needed is I go back to the earlier comment by Mr. Babu about partnerships, and how do you start to tie all of this together and come back with a single package of solutions that addresses the problem at a city-by-city level across a range of different waste types. And the more that we can come back and address a combination of solutions so that there is one offer to the city, I think we're more likely to be successful, especially if it is economically viable.
So then I think it's worth looking at the technology package which we discussed with Shell, and also looking at how we can make it more acceptable in terms of its financial viability and what kind of waste it treats. We now move to Mr. Venkatesh Valluri, and Mr. Valluri would also discuss about the technological challenges which we have in waste management. Mr. Valluri.
So I'm going to probably digress a little bit on this topic, because the overarching topic was circular economy of what we can do. And of course, waste is one component of that. But when we really talk about circular economy, I think we are going to move from what traditionally we all used to, from a linear production process, to a more circular economic approach, which means that whatever technology, whatever product, whatever area you're trying to actually solve, eventually you got to get to a situation where the components of that product or solution can be actually returned back in an economical sense back to that process. And I think that's very important for all of us to learn and understand that whatever the numbers you've heard, whether it's 62 million tons of waste, or whether whatever is happening, whether it's inert, whether they are products, at the end of the day, the cradle to grave, when I say when a product is actually getting produced and by the time it's actually getting retired, this whole process is actually generating a whole lot of what I would call as unwanted, whether it's methane gases, whether it's ozone depletion, whether whatever it is, or the pollution it's causing. We need to figure a way out of how do you actually recycle it back. And that's the whole concept of circular economy. And I think you heard certain processes, behavioral changes, certain technologies. There has to be an economic process for this. And typically, if you look at the other countries, and I'm not saying that they are the benchmark right now, but what we need to do is to create certain benchmarks today in India. If I'm buying a washing machine and it's actually going to get retired after 5 years or 10 years, and I see a lot of young people sitting in this crowd who would be actually aspirational as they go forward, they'll have the necessary comforts in life, but how do you actually take those products and actually return it back into the cycle? What should be that process? And I think India needs to develop that piece of process very, very effectively. You know, for over the last at least 2 decades, a lot of you have been in the corporate world, I've been in the corporate world, we've actually focused on saying that, you know, does it meet the safety norms? Does it meet the, ISO 9000 processes? I think we now have to mature whether there is a standard we can actually build by saying, does it meet the circular economy norms? That means you produce a product. Has everyone looked at every product life cycle in between, the materials that are being used? When they get discharged, can you actually recycle them back? So that's one piece which is extremely important for all of us to think. And India needs to build these domain best practices, whether you're using aluminum, whether you're using some inert materials, whether you're using automotive, whether you're using anything else, or whether you're producing oil. Each component of that substage has got to be actually recycled back. And institutes like TERI, or probably the private sector, we got to develop that capacity in this country to say, for each of these product life cycles, we got to have the domain capacity and the ability to say, how are we going to recycle those products? That's, I think, one clear recommendation I would like to make on my behalf, saying that that's what we need to do. Second, coming to technology. Today, we have to figure a way out of how do we converge multiple technologies to actually produce solutions. Today, we are working in 2 cities, not naming the cities, but what we have done is we've actually broken down these cities into wards. And in this ward, what we have done is we've actually put multiple technologies to measure air pollution, to measure water pollution, to measure infrastructure capability, to measure energy mix. And when we do that, the most critical piece which the society looks at is, if there is pollution, what is the impact on health? And if we can actually correlate some of these pollutions, whether it's air, water, etc., to health, then I think the behavioral changes are much more quicker, because then it actually impacts you and me as an individual. And I think then whatever the team as over here has talked about, of actually segregating waste, treating waste, taking energy out of it, whether you're putting a multiple, a distillation process of what the previous speaker mentioned about, you put a secret sauce of actually treating the waste and actually getting outputs out. I think all that will fall in place. So we've got these two examples we're running today, integrating technologies, converging them, and looking at solutions for a ward in a city. And we hope that becomes the experiment for us to actually replicate it across the whole country if that actually proves successful. So I'll rest it here, and we can take questions as we go forward. Thank you.
So much, Mr. Valluri, for telling us that we need benchmark, which actually benchmark for products, which actually conform to circular economy principles. Before we open the session, and I must thank all the speakers for, this excellent management of time. Before we open the session for question and answer, we have a question for audience. And after the voting, we would start the Q&A session.
There we go. There are your questions. You've got 10 seconds, I believe, to vote. You'll see that, which material accounts are maximum. There we go, 10, 9, 8. Fascinating to see what your response is. I know what mine is. And biodegradable organic is just about ahead of plastic. And there appears to be almost a minus number for wood, which is interesting. Anybody want to comment on that from the panel briefly?
It's interesting.
Any thoughts on that? I find that quite encouraging. If there's so much is organic, we can do something with that, can't we?
Yes. That certainly tells us that organics, our critical action needs to be dealing with organics, which is also cause for GHG emission.
Yeah.
So,
but at the same time, if I can, I think, like a lot of this, for example, we saw the plastics percentage. In reality, the plastic actually is not so much in India. That all of us are driven by this kind of a notion that we generate a lot of plastic, but it's not the fact. The plastic essentially is just about 7% of the total waste that we generate on a day-to-day basis. Wood actually is quite high.
Yes.
Right. I think, gentlemen, we have to move on to the next panel.
Okay. Do we have time for Q&A or we vacate?
I believe I've been encouraged to move things along, otherwise everyone will starve to death.
Anyway, big round of applause for our panelists. And it has been quite a learning experience for me as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr.